How to apologize like a Junzi, noble person. You've apologized. You've said the words. You've even meant them. And yet somehow, the other person is angrier than before you opened your mouth. Or perhaps it's the opposite problem. You've watched someone deliver what should have been a simple apology, and instead you witnessed a masterclass in excuse-making, self-justification, and emotional manipulation wrapped in the words "I'm sorry." You knew you were being manipulated. They probably knew you knew. And everyone pretended otherwise. Here's the uncomfortable truth: most of us are absolutely terrible at apologizing. Not because we lack good intentions, but because we've never been taught that an apology is a skill, one that requires precision, timing, and a level of self-awareness that our culture actively discourages. We live in an era of public apology spectacles. Celebrities issue statements. Politicians express regret for any offense caused. Brands apologize for falling short of our values. And every single one of these performances teaches us the wrong lesson, that apologies are about reputation management, not genuine repair. The result? When it actually matters, when we've hurt someone we care about, when we've made a genuine mistake at work, when we've acted beneath our own standards, we freeze. We deflect. We say, "I'm sorry you feel that way," and wonder why the relationship doesn't heal. Confucius had something to say about this. Actually, he had rather a lot to say about it, because in his system of ethics, the ability to acknowledge fault wasn't just good manners, it was the defining characteristic of a Junzi, a person of cultivated virtue. The Analects returns to this theme again and again. The difference between a noble person and a petty one isn't that the noble person never errs. It's that they know how to make it right. This video examines why most apologies fail spectacularly, and what Confucian ethics can teach us about getting them right. We'll look at the specific mechanics of an apology that actually repairs trust, the psychological traps that make us defensive, and the particular way Confucius understood the relationship between acknowledging fault and maintaining dignity. You'll notice that the Confucian approach doesn't make apologizing easier or more comfortable. If anything, it makes it harder. It demands more honesty, more precision, more willingness to sit with discomfort. But it offers something our modern approach doesn't, a genuine path to repair, rather than just damage control. Let's begin with why we get this so spectacularly wrong. The anatomy of a failed apology. Think about the last apology you received that made everything worse. Chances are, it fell into one of these categories. There's the minimizer, "I'm sorry, but it wasn't that big a deal." The person acknowledges fault whilst simultaneously telling you that your response is disproportionate. Your hurt is real, but apparently it's also your problem. There's the reverser, "I'm sorry you feel that way." Notice the grammar. This construction makes your feelings the subject of the sentence, not their actions. They've apologized for your emotional state whilst taking no responsibility for causing it. There's the competitor, "I'm sorry, but you did X, Y, and Z." Within seconds, the apology has become a negotiation about who's more at fault. You're no longer discussing repair, you're tallying scores. There's the performer, "I'm devastated that I've hurt you. I don't know how I'll live with myself." Suddenly you're in the bizarre position of comforting the person who wronged you. Their distress has become the crisis, not the original harm. And then there's the most common one of all, the ghost apology, nothing. Radio silence. The incident hangs in the air, unacknowledged, whilst both parties pretend things are normal and wonder why the relationship feels subtly broken. Each of these fails for a different reason, but they share a common flaw: they prioritize the apologizer's comfort over the relationship's repair. They are strategies for managing embarrassment, not tools for restoring trust. What makes this particularly frustrating is that most of these failed apologies are delivered by people who genuinely believe they're apologizing. They're not consciously manipulating. They're not deliberately avoiding responsibility. They're simply enacting the only script they know, one that our culture has taught them through thousands of terrible examples. Consider the standard corporate apology: we apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused. This construction is so common we barely notice its absurdity. Any suggests there might not have been inconvenience. May have suggests uncertainty about whether harm occurred. The entire sentence manages to express regret whilst denying that anything specific actually happened. We absorb this language. We learn that apologies are defensive maneuvers, ways of appearing contrite whilst admitting nothing concrete. We learn that the goal is to make the awkwardness go away as quickly as possible, not to actually repair what's been broken. Confucius saw this pattern everywhere, though obviously not in corporate statements. In the Analects, he observes, "The gentleman is ashamed if his words exceed his deeds." Notice what he's identifying: the problem isn't just doing wrong. It's the gap between what we claim about ourselves and how we actually behave. An apology should close that gap. Bad apologies widen it. When you say "I'm sorry" but hedge it with qualifications, when you apologize whilst simultaneously explaining why you're not really at fault, when you express regret but change nothing about your behavior, you're demonstrating exactly the gap Confucius identifies. Your words exceed your deeds. You're claiming to be sorry whilst acting in ways that protect you from actually facing what you've done. He goes further: when you have made a mistake, do not be afraid to correct it. This appears in multiple passages of the Analects, which suggests Confucius considered it central rather than peripheral. And that phrase, "do not be afraid," is doing crucial work. Because what stops us apologizing properly isn't lack of knowledge. It's fear. We're afraid that admitting fault will make us look weak. We're afraid that acknowledging harm will invite further criticism. We're afraid that taking full responsibility will mean accepting a level of shame we can't bear. We're afraid that if we don't defend ourselves, we'll be defined entirely by our worst moment. So we hedge. We qualify. We add "but" to every apology. We spread the blame around until everyone's a bit guilty and no one's truly responsible. And in doing so, we make it impossible for genuine repair to occur. The Junzi's approach begins with recognizing these fears and choosing to act rightly despite them, not because the fears aren't real, but because allowing them to dictate your behavior is its own form of moral failure. The Confucian framework: why apologies matter to human relationships. Before we get to the practical mechanics of apologizing well, we need to understand why Confucius considered this such a crucial skill. Because in his ethical system, an apology isn't a social nicety or a tool for smoothing over awkwardness. It's a fundamental expression of ren, often translated as benevolence or humaneness, though those translations don't quite capture the full weight of the term. Ren is best understood as the quality that makes us fully human in relationship with others. It's what makes you pause when you see someone struggling. It's what makes you care about the impact of your words. It's the capacity to recognize that other people aren't just obstacles or tools or background characters in your story. They're fully real, fully human, within lives as complex as your own. When you harm someone, even accidentally, even with the best intentions, you've violated ren. You've treated them, in that moment, as less than fully real. Perhaps you prioritized your own comfort over their dignity. Perhaps you acted as though your needs were the only ones that mattered. Perhaps you simply weren't paying attention to your impact. An apology is how you restore their reality, their dignity. It's how you say, "I see that you exist, that you matter, that your experience is valid." It's a fundamentally relational act, not a transaction. This is worth pausing on because modern apology culture has become deeply transactional. We apologize to discharge an obligation, to make things square, to return the relationship to neutral as quickly as possible. The apology is a payment that clears a debt. But ren doesn't work that way. In Confucian ethics, human relationships aren't balanced ledgers. They're living, ongoing practices of mutual recognition and care. When you harm someone, you haven't created a debt to be paid off. You've damaged the fabric of relationship itself. The apology is part of the repair work, but it's not a payment that automatically restores everything. This is why Confucius pairs Ren with Li, ritual propriety, or perhaps better understood as the right way of conducting yourself in specific relationships and situations. Li is structure, form, the specific actions that transform vague good intentions into tangible reality. You might feel sorry. You might genuinely care that you've hurt someone. But Li is what turns that feeling into an apology that actually does something. It's the difference between feeling bad and knowing exactly what to say, when to say it, and how to follow through. Think of it this way: Ren is the internal disposition of caring about others' humanity. Li is the external form that gives that disposition concrete expression. Most of us have one without the other. We care deeply but bumble the execution, or we perform the ritual without genuine feeling. The Junzi cultivates both simultaneously. Confucius uses the image of music to explain this relationship. A melody played on the finest instruments with perfect technique but no feeling is empty. But feeling without skill produces only noise. You need both. The same applies to apologies. Genuine remorse without skillful execution fails to repair. Skillful words without genuine remorse create cynicism. There's also Yi, righteousness, though that English word carries connotations that muddy the concept. Yi is perhaps better understood as fitness, appropriateness, doing what's right in this specific situation. It's the capacity to see clearly what's required morally, unclouded by self-interest or social pressure. When it comes to apologies, Yi is what helps you distinguish between what will make this go away fastest and what will actually repair this. These are often different courses of action. The first prioritizes your comfort. The second prioritizes the relationship. A genuine apology guided by Yi is often harder in the short term than the alternatives. It's easier to ghost someone than to face their hurt. It's easier to deflect blame than to sit with shame. It's easier to make excuses than to simply say, "I was wrong. There's no good reason. I'm sorry." Yi is what gives you the moral clarity to choose the harder path because it's the fitting one, the one that serves the relationship rather than just your ego. And finally, there's Shin, trustworthiness, reliability, the quality of being someone whose word means something. In the Analects, Confucius says, "A person who is not trustworthy, I do not know what they can accomplish." He's not saying they're a bad person. He's saying they're fundamentally unable to function in human relationships, because all relationship depends on trust. An apology is ultimately a promise: I acknowledge what I did, I understand why it was wrong, and I'm committing to not doing it again. But we live in a culture where apologies have become so debased, so performative, that they barely mean anything anymore. "I said I was sorry" has become a get-out-of-jail-free card, as though the words themselves discharge all obligation. Politicians apologize for scandals and immediately repeat the behavior. Partners apologize for the same transgression for the 20th time. Colleagues apologize for being late and remain late every single meeting. Shin insists that your apology is only as good as the changed behavior that follows. The Junzi knows that trust is rebuilt through consistent action over time, not through clever words delivered in a moment of crisis. Put it all together and you get a framework that's both demanding and liberating. Demanding because it refuses you all the comfortable exits, the excuses, the minimizing, the blame shifting, the quick fixes. Liberating because it offers a genuine path to repair, rather than just reputational damage control. The Confucian approach asks more of you than modern apology culture does. It requires more honesty about your motivations, more precision in your words, more consistency in your follow-through. But what it offers in return is the possibility of relationships that can survive conflict, deepen through adversity, and maintain trust even after serious harm. The Mechanics of a Junzi Apology, Part 1. Right. Theory established. Now let's get practical. What does an apology actually look like when filtered through Confucian ethics? First, take full responsibility with zero qualifications. This is the hardest part and the most essential. A proper apology contains no but, no however, no to be fair. The formula is brutally simple. I did X. X was wrong. I am responsible for X. Notice what's missing: explanations for why you did X, context about what was happening in your life at the time, reminders about the other person's contributory behavior, information about your childhood or your stress levels or your mental state. All of that might be relevant later in a different conversation about how you both move forward or what patterns led to the harm. But it has no place in the initial apology. None. Not even a little bit. Why? Because every qualification dilutes responsibility. Every but says tactually, I'm not fully responsible. Every piece of context says, given the circumstances, this wasn't entirely my fault. I'm sorry I snapped at you, but I was stressed might feel like honest context to you. To the other person, it reads as, I'm sort of sorry, but really this is partly your problem for catching me at a bad time. I'm sorry I forgot our anniversary, but work has been crazy translates to, my priorities are correct, you're wrong to be hurt. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I was excited about the idea becomes, my excitement matters more than your right to be heard. The person receiving these apologies hears what you don't intend to say. They hear, I'm not really sorry. I'm just sorry you're upset. And if you were more reasonable, you wouldn't be upset at all. The Junzi understands that taking full responsibility isn't about achieving some perfect moral calculus where you are 100% at fault and they're 0% at fault. That's rarely how human conflict works. Most situations are complex, with multiple contributing factors and shared responsibility. But an apology is not the moment to litigate that complexity. An apology is the moment to focus entirely on your action and its impact, regardless of context or provocation or mitigating circumstances. This is what Confucius means when he says, the gentleman seeks the cause of his troubles in himself, the small man seeks it in others. He's specifically talking about where you direct your attention when things go wrong. The petty person immediately looks outward. What did they do? What were the circumstances? How was I provoked? The Junzi looks inward first. What did I do? What was my part? Where did I fail to meet my own standards? This doesn't mean you're always entirely at fault. It means that when the time comes to apologize, you focus on your portion of the responsibility without deflecting or diminishing it by pointing to others' contributions. Here's what this looks like in practice. Instead of, I'm sorry I raised my voice, but you were refusing to listen, you say, I raised my voice. That was wrong. I should have found another way to communicate, and I didn't. I'm sorry. The other person's behavior might have been frustrating. They might even owe you an apology for their part. But this isn't that conversation. This is the conversation where you take responsibility for your behavior, full stop. Second, name the harm specifically. Generic apologies are worse than useless. I'm sorry if I upset you is cowardly. It doesn't name what happened, doesn't acknowledge the specific impact, doesn't demonstrate that you actually understand what you're apologizing for. The word if is particularly insidious. If I upset you suggests you're not certain harm occurred. You're apologizing for a hypothetical that might not be real. It's the ultimate hedge. I'll say sorry in case you're upset, but I'm not actually admitting that I definitely did something wrong. A Junzi apology includes a specific accounting. Not vague gestures towards general upset, but precise description of what you did and what impact it had. For example, I interrupted you 3 times during yesterday's meeting. That was disrespectful. It communicated that I don't value your contributions. I imagine it was both embarrassing in front of the team and frustrating because you didn't get to finish making your point. Notice several things here. You're not saying, "I'm sorry you felt embarrassed." You're saying, "I did something embarrassing." The difference is enormous. One centers their feelings as the problem, the other centers your action as the cause. You're also doing something difficult, you're imagining their experience. This is Ren in action. You're temporarily setting aside your own perspective, all your reasons and explanations and justifications, and genuinely trying to see the situation through their eyes. This is surprisingly hard. Our instinct when accused or when we know we've done wrong is to defend ourselves, to explain why things look different from our angle, to make sure they understand our intentions. The Junzi resists that instinct long enough to genuinely understand the impact, regardless of intent. Your intentions might have been good. You might have interrupted because you were excited about their idea and wanted to build on it. You might have been trying to help them make their point more clearly. None of that changes the impact. None of that erases the harm. Confucius is clear about this throughout the Analects. What matters isn't just what you intended, but what you actually did and how it affected others. The cultivation of virtue requires the ability to see your behavior from the outside, to understand how you're experienced by others rather than just how you experience yourself. This is why naming the harm specifically matters so much. It demonstrates that you've done the work of understanding impact rather than just defending intent. It shows you're taking their experience seriously rather than dismissing it or minimizing it. Here's another example. Instead of, "I'm sorry about the other day," you say, "I'm sorry I made fun of your presentation idea in front of everyone. That undermined your authority and made you look foolish. I would have been humiliated if someone did that to me. It was cruel, and there's no excuse for it." The specificity does several things simultaneously. It shows you remember exactly what happened, you're not fuzzy on the details or pretending it was smaller than it was. It shows you understand the impact, you've thought about how they experienced it. And it shows you're holding yourself to a standard, you're calling your own behavior cruel, not softening it with euphemisms. This level of specificity is uncomfortable. It requires you to fully face what you've done rather than keeping it vague and therefore more bearable. But that discomfort is part of the repair. The person you've harmed has been sitting with the discomfort of your action. Your willingness to sit with the discomfort of naming it precisely is the beginning of restoring balance. Third, no expectation of immediate forgiveness. Here's where most apologies go catastrophically wrong. We deliver the apology and then immediately expect the slate to be wiped clean. When the other person remains hurt or angry or distant, we feel aggrieved. "But I apologized. What more do you want?" This reveals the real motive behind the apology, not repair, but debt clearing. Not restoration of relationship, but restoration of our own comfort. We're trying to return things to neutral as quickly as possible because the discomfort of having caused harm is unbearable. So we apologize not because we care about their healing, but because we need them to stop being upset so we can stop feeling guilty. The apology becomes another self-centered act masquerading as care. The Junzi knows that genuine repair takes time. Confucius speaks repeatedly throughout the Analects about the importance of patience, proper timing, and allowing things to develop naturally rather than forcing premature resolution. There's a passage where he discusses planting trees. You must water them and tend them, but you cannot make them grow faster by pulling on the shoots. If you do, you'll kill the plant. Relationships operate on the same principle. You can do the right things, apologize sincerely, change your behavior, demonstrate trustworthiness, but you cannot force the other person to trust you again on your preferred timeline. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can say after apologizing is, "I understand if you need time. I'm not asking you to forgive me right now or even soon. I just wanted you to know that I see what I did, and I'm genuinely sorry. This does something radical. It gives them back their agency. They don't owe you forgiveness. They don't owe you absolution. They don't have to make you feel better about having hurt them. They get to decide when and whether to trust you again. Your job is simply to be trustworthy, to be the person worthy of trust, whether or not they're currently witnessing it or choosing to trust you. This is what Shin demands. You become reliable not to get something in return, but because being reliable is who you're committed to being. This is genuinely difficult advice to embody. We want our apologies to work. We want the relationship restored now. We want credit for our humility and our growth and our willingness to admit fault. We want them to see how hard we're trying. But none of that is about them. It's all about us, our need for reassurance, our need to be seen as good people despite our bad actions, our need to escape the discomfort of being in the wrong. The Junzi's approach requires you to tolerate that discomfort without demanding that the other person relieve it for you. You sit with the knowledge that you've harmed someone, that they're rightfully upset, and that your relationship may not recover, and you do the right thing anyway. The mechanics of a Junzi apology, Part 2. Fourth, the apology includes a specific commitment to change. This is where Shin, trustworthiness, moves from abstract virtue to concrete action. Words without subsequent change in behavior are worse than silence. They teach the other person that your apologies are performances, not genuine commitments. They erode trust more deeply than if you'd never apologized at all. So your apology should include something concrete and observable. Going forward, I'm going to specific action. I'm also going to a specific preventative measure. Notice that this needs to be specific and measurable, not vague aspiration. I'll try to be more respectful is too nebulous. You can't prove you've done it, and the other person can't point to its absence. But I'm going to count to 3 after someone finishes speaking before I jump in, and if I catch myself interrupting, I'll immediately stop and say sorry. Please finish is observable. Either you do it or you don't. For example, returning to the interruption scenario, I interrupted you in yesterday's meeting. Going forward, I'm going to send an email to the team this afternoon acknowledging your contribution and the point I should have let you finish making. And in future meetings, I'm going to practice a specific rule for myself, count to 3 after someone finishes speaking before I respond. If I catch myself interrupting anyway, I'll stop immediately and invite you to continue. Or if you've been consistently late, I've been late to our last 5 meetings. That's disrespectful of your time. Going forward, I'm going to set 2 alarms, one 15 minutes before I need to leave, one when I need to leave. If something genuinely prevents me from arriving on time, I'll message you as soon as I know, not 5 minutes after the meeting was supposed to start. Or if you shared something they told you in confidence, I shared what you told me about your family situation with Sarah. That was a complete violation of your trust. I'm going to tell Sarah that I shared something I shouldn't have and ask her to keep it private. And going forward, I'm going to establish a rule for myself. If I'm ever uncertain whether something is confidential, I'll ask before repeating it. I won't assume. This specificity is uncomfortable because it creates accountability. You've stated publicly what you're going to do differently. If you don't follow through, the failure is visible and undeniable. You can't later claim you were trying or that you're doing better. The standard is clear, and either you're meeting it or you're not. But that discomfort is precisely why it works. It demonstrates that you're not just managing the awkwardness of the present moment, you're genuinely committing to preventing future harm. There's another element here worth noting. When you specify the concrete action you'll take, you're also doing something important for the other person. You're giving them a way to observe your change without having to audit you constantly or ask uncomfortable questions about whether you've improved. If you just say I'll be better, they have to guess whether you're actually different or just waiting for things to blow over. But if you've said I'll count to 3 before speaking, they can see whether you're doing it. The change is legible. And over time, as they observe you consistently following through, trust begins to rebuild. This is Confucius's understanding of Li in action. Li isn't just about performing the right ritual in the moment. It's about establishing sustainable practices that shape your character over time through repetition. You're not just apologizing, you're changing the habit that led to the harm. Fifth, sometimes the apology is in the repair, not the words. Here's something Confucius understood that our words-obsessed culture often misses. Sometimes saying, "I'm sorry," isn't the apology. The changed behavior is the apology. Throughout the Analects, Confucius consistently prioritizes action over speech. He says, "The gentleman is ashamed if his words exceed his deeds." He praises the person who is slow to speak but quick to act. He's deeply suspicious of eloquence disconnected from behavior. This has direct implications for apologies. Sometimes a long conversation is needed. Sometimes a letter or a carefully thought-through explanation. But sometimes, particularly when the harm has been ongoing or when previous apologies haven't led to change, the most meaningful apology is simply to stop doing the harmful thing and start doing the right thing, consistently and without fanfare. I once observed a situation where someone, after a significant betrayal, never explicitly apologized in the conventional sense. But over the following year, they quietly and consistently did the work. They changed the behavior that had caused the harm. They proved reliable in small ways. They showed up when they said they would. They kept confidences. They never asked for acknowledgement or credit for being better. That was the apology. The person they'd hurt saw it, felt it, and eventually the relationship rebuilt, not because of words, but because of demonstrated, consistent change in character. This isn't an excuse to avoid the difficult conversation. Words matter. Explicit acknowledgement matters. But it's a reminder that in Confucian ethics, words and deeds must align. If you have to choose between a beautiful apology and consistent, humble action, choose the action. The action is the apology. There's also this dimension: sometimes the appropriate response to harm you've caused isn't an apology at all, but restitution. You've broken something, and the repair is to fix it or replace it. You've taken something, and the repair is to return it or compensate for it. Confucius would understand this instinctively. In his framework, yi, appropriateness, fitness, means responding to each situation with what it specifically requires, not with a one-size-fits-all formula. Some situations require words. Some require changed behavior. Some require material restitution. The Junzi develops the wisdom to discern which is which. Sixth, consider the relationship context. One of the most sophisticated elements of Confucian ethics is its recognition that different relationships have different moral textures. You don't owe the same things to everyone. Your obligations to your parents are different from your obligations to a colleague, which are different from your obligations to a stranger. This affects how you apologize. The form should match the relationship and the harm. If you've hurt your spouse or your closest friend, someone with whom you have deep relational history and mutual vulnerability, the apology needs to be extensive. It needs to honor the depth of trust they've placed in you and the depth of hurt your action caused. A quick sorry doesn't match the weight of the relationship. If you've been rude to a shop assistant or brusque with a stranger, the apology needs to be genuine but proportionate. You don't unburden yourself at length, you acknowledge the harm simply and then get out of their way. If you've wronged a colleague, the apology needs to be professional, specific, and focused on restoration of working relationship. It's not the place for deep emotional processing, it's the place for clear acknowledgement and concrete commitment to different behavior. Confucius is explicit about this throughout the Analects. When asked whether one should love everyone equally, he essentially says no, you should love according to the relationship. You love your parents differently from how you love friends, differently from how you care for strangers. The same principle applies to apologies. The depth, form, and content should match the relationship. This isn't about loving some people less, it's about recognizing that different relationships have different appropriate forms of expression. This also means that sometimes the most respectful apology is to leave someone alone. If you've harmed someone who has made clear they don't want contact with you, sending an apology can itself be another violation, another prioritizing of your need to feel absolved over their need for space. In those cases, the apology is to respect their boundary, to do the internal work of understanding what you did wrong, and to commit to not repeating that pattern with others. You don't get the catharsis of being forgiven. That's part of the consequence. When the other person won't accept your apology. Right, here's the scenario that drives people to distraction: you've done everything correctly. You've taken responsibility without qualification. You've named the harm specifically. You've offered concrete commitments to change. You've given them space and time. And the other person either doesn't believe you, won't forgive you, or keeps bringing it up months later. What now? The Junzi's answer might surprise you: you do nothing differently. You don't withdraw the apology. You don't get defensive. You don't start resenting them for not letting it go. You simply continue being trustworthy. Confucius is remarkably clear on this: the gentleman is not a vessel. This is one of the most important passages in the Analects, though its implications are easy to miss. A vessel is a tool, it's shaped entirely by its function and by external use. A cup is a cup because it holds liquid. It has no existence beyond that use. A person of cultivated character is not like that. Your commitment to doing right doesn't depend on whether others recognize it. Your integrity doesn't fluctuate based on whether you're getting credit. You're not performing virtue in order to achieve a specific response, you're embodying virtue because that's who you're committed to being. This is genuinely difficult advice. We want our apologies to work. We want the relationship restored now. We want credit for our humility and growth. We want them to see how hard we're trying, how much we've changed, how sincere we are. But if your apology is contingent on their response, if you'll only continue being trustworthy if they acknowledge it, then your apology wasn't genuine. It was a transaction. You were offering changed behavior in exchange for forgiveness, and when they didn't hold up their end of the bargain, you withdrew yours. The Confucian approach is more demanding than that. You apologize and change not to achieve a specific outcome, but because it's the right thing to do. Their response, whether forgiveness, continued anger, or anything in between, doesn't alter your responsibility to behave rightly. There's also this: sometimes people need to stay angry for a while. Sometimes the harm was significant enough that immediate forgiveness would be inappropriate, a kind of self-betrayal. Sometimes processing the hurt takes longer than you'd like. Sometimes they need to test whether your changed behavior is genuine or just temporary performance. All of that is reasonable. Your discomfort with their ongoing hurt doesn't make their hurt illegitimate. Your desire for resolution doesn't obligate them to provide it. So what do? You continue demonstrating trustworthiness. You don't bring it up repeatedly or ask for status updates on their feelings. You don't make your good behavior contingent on their acknowledgement. You simply, quietly, consistently be the person you should have been all along. Over time, and it might be a long time, one of three things happens. Either they begin to trust you again as they observe your consistent change, or they decide the relationship isn't repairable and choose distance, or they remain in relationship but with adjusted expectations. All three of those outcomes are valid. You don't get to decide which one occurs. Your job is just to be trustworthy, regardless of which path they choose. There's also this reality: sometimes, despite your best efforts, a relationship is genuinely irreparable. Not every harm can be undone. Not every trust, once destroyed, can be rebuilt. The Confucian tradition is realistic about this. It doesn't promise that virtuous behavior guarantees happy outcomes. What it does promise is that you'll retain your integrity. You'll know you did the right thing. You'll have developed the capacity to maintain relationships more skillfully in future. And you won't carry the additional weight of knowing you failed to take responsibility when you should have. That's not nothing. In fact, in terms of your own character development, it's everything. The Junzi is more concerned with being the right kind of person than with whether others recognize it. That's the difference between genuinely cultivated character and performance. But here's the part that's harder to accept. Sometimes the person who won't accept your apology is acting unreasonably. Sometimes they're nursing grievance, keeping you on the hook indefinitely, weaponizing your guilt. Even in those cases, the Junzi's response remains the same. You continue being trustworthy, but you also don't allow yourself to be endlessly manipulated. There's a difference between giving someone time to heal and accepting abusive dynamics where your apology becomes a tool for ongoing control. Confucius would recognize this distinction. His ethics are relational, but they're not self-negating. You honor the other person's humanity, but you also maintain your own dignity. Sometimes that means accepting that a relationship has run its course, not because you failed to apologize adequately, but because the other person isn't interested in genuine repair. That's a judgment call that requires moral discernment about what's appropriate in this specific situation. There's no formula. But the general principle holds: you remain trustworthy regardless of their response, whilst also not subjecting yourself to endless punishment. The apology you owe yourself. There's one more dimension we need to address, because it's where many people get stuck in ways that prevent them from functioning. What about when the person you most need to apologize to is yourself? You've acted beneath your own standards. You've violated your values. You've done something that, in your clearer moments, you know was wrong. And now you're caught in a loop of self-recrimination that serves no one and repairs nothing. This is where modern therapy culture and Confucian ethics diverge in interesting ways. Modern approaches often emphasize self-compassion, self-forgiveness, releasing shame. Confucian ethics is less concerned with how you feel about yourself and more concerned with what you do next. Confucius has surprisingly practical advice for this situation. He says, "The gentleman is neither anxious nor afraid." When pressed on what he means, he elaborates: if you're conducting yourself with integrity, examining your behavior honestly, and correcting errors when you find them, what is there to be anxious about? You're doing what can be done. Notice what's absent from this formulation: extensive emotional processing of guilt, detailed analysis of why you're a bad person, prolonged wallowing in shame. The Junzi doesn't do any of that because it's useless. Worse than useless, it's self-indulgent. Shame that doesn't lead directly to change behavior is just narcissism in disguise. You're so focused on what a terrible person you are, so consumed with your own guilt and self-flagellation, that you've made your feelings the center of attention rather than actually fixing anything. This is a hard thing to hear, but it's worth sitting with. Sometimes what looks like taking responsibility is actually another form of self-centeredness. The person who endlessly beats themselves up, who can't let go of their mistakes, who processes their guilt at length, they're still making it about themselves. Just in a different way. The Confucian approach is more austere and, in practice, more compassionate. When you've behaved badly, you do three things: you look clearly at what happened, you identify what led to the behavior, and you commit to a different path. Then you move on. Not because the error didn't matter. Not because you're letting yourself off the hook. But because dwelling on it doesn't serve growth. The Analects records Confucius praising a student who does not repeat his errors. That's the standard: learn and move on. Notice that the standard isn't never err. That would be impossible, and Confucius never demands the impossible. The standard is: don't make the same mistake twice. Fail forward. Let each error teach you something that prevents the next one. This is surprisingly difficult in practice because we're culturally conditioned to believe that if we feel bad enough for long enough, that constitutes moral improvement. It doesn't. Feeling terrible is just feeling terrible. The improvement is in the changed behavior, not the intensity of your remorse. Here's what this looks like practically. Let's say you've lost your temper with your child, said something harsh, seen them flinch. The moment passes. They recover. But you're left with the sick knowledge that you've done harm to someone you love, someone who depends on you to be safe. The unhelpful response: spend the next 3 days consumed with guilt, mentally replaying the incident, catastrophizing about the lasting damage you've done, questioning whether you're fit to be a parent, working yourself into such a state that you're even less present and patient than before. The Junzi response: acknowledge clearly what you did wrong, apologize to your child specifically and without justification, examine what led to the outburst. Were you hungry? Sleep deprived? Stressed about work? Acting out scripts from your own childhood, identify concrete steps to prevent recurrence, eat before difficult conversations, take 3 breaths before responding when frustrated, get more sleep, and then, this is crucial, let it go. Not because it didn't matter. Because you've done what can be done. Continuing to torment yourself doesn't help your child. It just makes you less available to be the parent they need going forward. There's a passage in the Analects where Confucius says, "If I have erred, people will surely notice." This sounds almost flippant, but there's profound wisdom in it. You don't need to perform elaborate self-punishment to prove you take your errors seriously. Your errors are visible. Others have noticed. You don't need to make a theatrical display of remorse. What you need to do is correct the error and not repeat it. That's the actual work. Everything else is performance, often designed more to make you feel like you're doing something than to actually change anything. This applies with particular force to past errors you can't fix. Maybe you hurt someone who's now dead or unreachable. Maybe you made a choice years ago that had consequences you can't undo. Maybe you've done something you genuinely cannot repair, no matter how much you wish you could. The modern therapeutic approach often focuses on processing, acceptance, self-forgiveness. The Confucian approach is starker: you can't change the past. You can only commit to being different now. So commit to being different now, and then get on with it. This isn't coldness. It's refusing to waste your present on a past you cannot alter. The person you harm doesn't benefit from your ongoing guilt. The only thing that could possibly benefit them, or prevent future harm to others, is your changed behavior. So change your behavior. Then direct your energy outward, to the relationships and responsibilities you have now, rather than inward to endless self-examination. There's one more aspect of this worth noting: sometimes the error you're stuck on isn't actually about your behavior. It's about your identity. You did something that violated your image of yourself as a good person, and now you're facing the uncomfortable reality that you're capable of cruelty, or cowardice, or selfishness. This is actually where Confucian ethics can be most helpful. Because Confucius never assumes you're a good person. He assumes you're a person who can become good through cultivation. The entire project of his ethics is about transformation, not about maintaining an illusion of existing virtue. When you discover you're capable of something you find shameful, that's not a crisis of identity. It's just information. It tells you where you need to work. The Junzi doesn't pretend to be already virtuous. The Junzi is committed to the ongoing practice of becoming more virtuous. This removes the need for elaborate self-justification or self-punishment. You're not defending an identity as a good person because you never claimed to be one. You're just trying to be better tomorrow than you are today. When you fall short, you note it, adjust, and continue. The difference between guilt and shame. This is worth distinguishing explicitly, because confusion between these two drives much of our dysfunctional relationship with apologies. Guilt says, "I did something wrong. This is a useful emotion. It's giving you information about a misalignment between your values and your behavior. It's prompting you to repair. Shame says, I am something wrong. This is a less useful emotion. It's not about your behavior, it's about your fundamental nature. It doesn't prompt repair, it prompts hiding, defending, or self-punishment. Most of us experience shame when guilt would be more appropriate. We don't just acknowledge that we made a mistake, we conclude that we're a bad person. And because that conclusion is unbearable, we defend against it by minimizing the mistake, by blaming others, by refusing to apologize, by making elaborate excuses. Or we go the opposite direction, we accept the shame and wallow in it, proving to ourselves and others just how terrible we are, how deeply we feel our failures, how seriously we take our moral obligations. Both responses are useless. The first prevents repair. The second makes repair all about you rather than about the person you've harmed. The Confucian framework helps here because it doesn't traffic in essential identity. You're not fundamentally good or fundamentally bad. You're someone engaged in ongoing cultivation. Sometimes you fall short. That's not a crisis, it's just the reality of being human and engaged in the difficult work of becoming better. When you've done something wrong, the appropriate response is guilt, clear information that you've violated a standard you care about. You feel the guilt, you use it to understand what needs repair, you do the repair, and then you release the guilt because it served its purpose. You don't need shame. You don't need to question your fundamental worth as a person. You just need to acknowledge the specific error, understand what led to it, and commit to different behavior going forward. This is, incidentally, why specific apologies work better than vague ones. When you apologize specifically, I interrupted you 3 times, you're dealing with behavior, which can be changed. When you apologize vaguely, I'm sorry I'm such a terrible person, you're dealing with identity, which feels immutable and therefore doesn't point toward any useful action. The Junzi deals in behavior, not identity. This is more honest and more useful. When apologizing is actually the wrong move. We need to address this directly. There are times when apologizing is actually the wrong thing to do, and recognizing those times is part of cultivating moral discernment. First, when someone is demanding an apology as a power play. They're not hurt, they're testing whether they can make you submit. They're using your conscientiousness as a weapon against you. This is surprisingly common in certain workplace dynamics and in some personal relationships. Someone reframes every disagreement as a harm that requires your apology. They're not seeking repair, they're seeking dominance. In these cases, apologizing doesn't repair anything. It teaches the other person that this tactic works, ensures they'll use it again, and gradually erodes your ability to maintain appropriate boundaries. The Confucian response, you maintain appropriateness. You don't apologize for things you haven't done wrong. You don't submit to unreasonable demands simply to keep the peace. You maintain your dignity whilst remaining open to genuine feedback. This requires discernment. Sometimes someone is genuinely hurt and you need to apologize. Sometimes someone is weaponizing hurt and you need to hold your ground. The difference isn't always obvious, which is why is a cultivated virtue rather than a simple formula. Second, when apologizing would cause more harm than good. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is leave someone alone. If someone has made clear they don't want contact with you, sending an apology, no matter how sincere, violates their boundary. Your need to be forgiven doesn't override their need for space. In those cases, the apology you owe them is to respect their wishes, do the internal work of understanding your error, and commit to not repeating that pattern with others. You don't get the resolution you want. That's part of the consequence. Third, when the error is so minor that apologizing would actually make it weird. You've slightly misspoken. You've been 2 minutes late to a casual coffee. You've forgotten a tiny detail of a story someone told you. In these cases, an elaborate apology is disproportionate. It centers something that didn't need centering. A simple "oh, my mistake," or "sorry, go ahead" is sufficient. Don't make people manage your guilt over minor, human imperfection. The Junzi has a sense of proportion. Not everything requires a formal apology. Some things just require a moment of acknowledgement and moving on. Fourth, when someone is angry with you but you've actually done nothing wrong. This is where many people get trapped. They apologize just to end conflict, even when they don't believe they've erred. Confucius would caution against this. It teaches both parties the wrong lesson. It teaches them that anger is sufficient grounds for an apology, regardless of actual wrongdoing. It teaches you that your perception of right and wrong matters less than avoiding discomfort. Sometimes the appropriate response to someone's anger is not an apology but a calm statement, "I understand you're upset. I've thought about this carefully, and I don't believe I've done anything that requires an apology. I'm willing to discuss where we see things differently." This isn't about being stubborn or refusing accountability. It's about maintaining integrity. If you apologize for things you don't believe are wrong, your apologies become meaningless. When you genuinely do err, your apology won't carry weight because you apologize for everything. The Junzi apologizes when they've actually erred, not as a general-purpose conflict resolution tool. The long game, building a reputation for trustworthiness. Here's something that emerges gradually. If you consistently apply these principles, you develop a reputation. Not a reputation for never making mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. A reputation for how you handle mistakes. Over time, the people in your life learn that when you apologize, you mean it. When you say you'll change something, you actually change it. When you take responsibility, you're not hedging or deflecting. You become someone whose word means something. This has cascading effects. When conflicts arise, and they will, people are more willing to assume good intent because you've demonstrated it consistently. When you say, "That's not what I meant," they believe you because you've never hidden behind that excuse when you did mean it. When you push back on an accusation, they take you seriously because you've never been defensive about legitimate criticism. In Confucian terms, you've cultivated Xin, trustworthiness. And Xin is the foundation of all functional relationships. Without it, everything is negotiation and suspicion and careful protection. With it, there's space for genuine connection, for risk, for vulnerability. The Analects contains a passage where Confucius says a state can survive without food or without weapons, but it cannot survive without the trust of its people. He's talking about political stability, but the principle applies to personal relationships. A relationship can survive poverty, distance, disagreement. It cannot survive the absence of trust. You build that trust through countless small demonstrations of reliability. And one of the most powerful demonstrations is how you handle being wrong. Most people become defensive when challenged. They protect their ego at the expense of the relationship. When you consistently do the opposite, when you acknowledge errors clearly, apologize genuinely, and follow through on commitments to change, you stand out. Not because you're morally superior. Not because you never mess up. But because you've done the work of learning to repair skillfully, and that skill is rare. This is the long game of Confucian cultivation. You're not trying to be impressive in any given moment. You're trying to become, gradually and through consistent practice, the kind of person who can be trusted. The kind of person whose relationships deepen rather than fracture under stress. The kind of person who treats others with genuine recognition of their full humanity. And here's what's interesting, this work is never finished. Confucius himself, at the end of his life, described himself as still learning, still cultivating, still refining his character. He wasn't claiming to have arrived at perfect virtue. He was committed to the ongoing practice of becoming better. The Junzi isn't someone who has mastered apologies and now does them perfectly. The Junzi is someone who remains committed to apologizing well, who continues to refine their understanding of what genuine repair requires, who doesn't rest on past successes but approaches each situation freshly. This is both humbling and liberating. Humbling because you never get to declare yourself done, to rest on your laurels, to say I'm good at this now. Liberating because you're not required to be perfect, only to be genuinely engaged in the ongoing work of cultivation. The cultural dimension, why we're so bad at this. It's worth stepping back and asking, why are we, collectively, so terrible at apologizing? Why does something that seems straightforward, acknowledge harm, take responsibility, commit to change, prove so difficult? Part of it is what we've already discussed: fear, ego protection, shame. But there's also a cultural dimension worth examining. We live in a culture that's deeply individualistic and highly defensive. We're taught from a young age that admitting fault makes you vulnerable to attack. We learn that if you give an inch, others will take a mile. We observe that public apologies are weaponized, that anything you admit can and will be used against you. We also live in a culture that treats relationships as basically optional. If one relationship becomes difficult, we can simply end it and find another. This is true for friendships, romantic relationships, even family relationships to some extent. We don't have the strong communal bonds that would make relationship repair essential rather than merely desirable. The result, we never develop the skills. We never learn to apologize well because we never have to. We can always just move on. Find new friends. Start over somewhere else. Curate our social media to show only the relationships that make us look good. Confucius lived in a very different world. Relationships weren't optional, they were fundamental to survival and identity. You couldn't simply ghost your family or your community. You were embedded in a web of relationships that you had to maintain, which meant you had to develop the skills to repair them when they frayed. Modern individualism removes that necessity. But it doesn't remove the human need for deep, lasting relationships. So we find ourselves in this strange position: we need the skills of relationship repair, but we're not forced to develop them, so most of us don't. The Confucian framework is valuable precisely because it was developed for a world where relationships mattered existentially. Where your place in your family, your community, your society determined your entire life. Where you couldn't afford to be bad at apologies because the stakes were too high. We don't live in that world anymore. But the skills remain relevant because the human need for genuine connection hasn't changed. We're still social animals. We still suffer when relationships fracture. We're still diminished when we can't trust or be trusted. So whilst we're not forced to cultivate these skills, we benefit enormously from choosing to cultivate them anyway. There's also this: our culture is saturated with bad models. Every celebrity scandal, every corporate crisis, every political controversy provides another example of how not to apologize. We absorb these patterns unconsciously and reproduce them in our own lives. The Confucian approach offers an alternative model. Not perfect, Confucian societies had their own failures and dysfunctions. But a model that starts from different premises, that relationships are central, that character is cultivated through practice, that being trustworthy matters more than looking trustworthy, that repair is possible but requires genuine work. 7 days of practice. Right. We've covered the theory, examined the mechanics, explored the complications. Now the work of embodiment begins. Here's what I'd suggest for the next week. Day 1, audit your apology history. Sit down with a notebook. Think back over the last 6 months. When did you apologize? To whom? For what? How did you do it? Don't do this to beat yourself up. Do it with curiosity. Which of the failure modes did you fall into? The minimizer, the reverser, the competitor, the performer, the ghost. Where do your patterns live? Also notice, when have you done it well? When have you taken clean responsibility, named specific harm, followed through on commitments? You're not only bad at this. None of us is only bad at this. Notice where you have capacity, even if it's inconsistent. Day 2. Identify one unresolved situation. Is there someone you owe an apology to? Maybe it's recent, something from last week that's still hanging awkwardly between you. Maybe it's from years ago, something you've never properly addressed. Maybe you apologized badly at the time and need to try again. Choose one situation. Not the biggest, most dramatic one. Not the easiest, most comfortable one. Choose one that feels significant enough to matter but manageable enough that you can actually follow through. Day 3. Craft the apology. Using the framework we've discussed, write down what you would say. Include specific description of what you did wrong. Specific acknowledgement of impact and harm. Full responsibility with zero qualifications, watch for those sneaky buts. Concrete commitment to different behavior going forward. No expectation of immediate forgiveness. Write it down. Actually write it. Notice how difficult it is to do this without qualifications sneaking in. Notice how many times you want to add context or explanation or justification. Keep editing until it's clean. Until there's no deflection, no minimizing, no spreading the blame around. Day 4. Sit with it. Don't deliver the apology yet. Sit with what you've written. Notice your resistance. Notice your fear. Are you afraid they'll reject the apology? Are you afraid they'll accept it but still not trust you? Are you afraid of looking weak? Are you afraid of the discomfort of the conversation itself? Notice these fears without judgment. They are human. They are normal. The Junzi doesn't eliminate fear, they act rightly despite fear. Day 5. Deliver the apology. Whether in person, by phone, or in writing, deliver it. Choose the medium that matches the relationship and the harm. Don't hide behind text if the situation deserves a conversation. Don't force a conversation if a letter would be more respectful. Deliver it and then, this is crucial, resist every urge to follow up with "So are we okay?" Or "Do you forgive me?" Or "Can we just move past this now?" Let it sit. Give them space. Trust that if you've genuinely apologized, the repair is underway, even if you can't see immediate results. Day 6. Observe your own behavior. Now that you've apologized, pay attention to whether you're actually following through on the specific commitments you made. This is where most apologies fail. The words are sincere, but the behavior doesn't change. So watch yourself. Are you doing the thing you said you'd do? Are you avoiding the pattern you said you'd avoid? This isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest with yourself about whether your apology was genuine or performative. If you find you're not following through, that's valuable information. It tells you either that you weren't actually committed to change, or that you need to adjust your strategy because the commitment you made isn't sustainable. Day 7. Reflect on the practice itself. How did it feel? What was hardest? What did you notice about your own resistance to taking full responsibility? Did the other person respond? If yes, how? If not, how are you handling that? Are you able to maintain your commitment to change behavior regardless of their response? Also reflect on this. Has this practice changed anything about how you're moving through the world? Are you more careful about your impact on others? Are you catching yourself before harm occurs? The endpoint isn't perfection. The endpoint is increased awareness and increased capacity. You're building the muscle of responsibility, the habit of clear sight, the practice of genuine repair. Closing. We've covered substantial ground: the specific ways apologies fail, what Confucian ethics demands of genuine repair, the mechanics of doing it skillfully, the complications when things don't resolve neatly, and the distinction between guilt and shame. But I want to end with something that might seem paradoxical: the best apology is the one you never have to make. Not because you're perfect. Not because you never err. But because you're cultivating the awareness to catch yourself before the harm occurs. Because you're building the kind of character that naturally treats people with seeing their full humanity, honoring their dignity, acting with care. The Analects records Confucius saying, "At 70, I could follow what my heart desired without transgressing what was right." This is the endpoint of cultivation, not rigid adherence to external rules, not constant monitoring of your behavior, but such deep alignment of character that doing right becomes natural. You're not 70 yet. Neither am I. We're going to keep making mistakes, keep needing to apologize, keep navigating the uncomfortable work of repair. This isn't failure, it's the human condition. But if we can learn to apologize like a Junzi, with full responsibility, clear sight, genuine commitment to change, and no expectation of immediate absolution, then our mistakes become opportunities for deepening relationships rather than ending them. This is the real gift of Confucian ethics applied to modern life, not a promise that you'll stop causing harm, but a framework for repairing it skillfully when you do. Not a guarantee that all relationships will survive conflict, but a method for giving them the best possible chance. The work is ongoing. There's no moment when you can declare yourself finished, no point at which you've mastered this completely. The Junzi is always still cultivating, always still refining, always still learning. But here's what changes: over time, through consistent practice, you become the kind of person whose relationships deepen under pressure rather than fracture. Whose word carries weight because it's backed by action. Who can be trusted because they've demonstrated trustworthiness hundreds of times in small ways. That reputation isn't built through grand gestures or perfect performance. It's built through the accumulation of small, unglamorous moments of integrity, acknowledging errors you could have hidden, taking responsibility you could have deflected, following through on commitments when no one's watching. This is what Confucius meant by cultivation. Not achieving some enlightened state where you transcend human fallibility, but developing the character to handle that fallibility with honesty, skill, and genuine concern for others. The world we live in doesn't make this easy. We're not embedded in the kind of permanent, unavoidable relationships that would force us to develop these skills. We can ghost people, move cities, start over. The cultural pressure to learn genuine apology is much weaker than it was in Confucius's time. But the need is just as strong. We still suffer when relationships fracture. We still feel the hollowness of interactions based on suspicion rather than trust. We still hunger for connections deep enough to weather conflict and emerge stronger. The Confucian framework offers a path to that depth. Not through being perfect, but through being honest. Not through never causing harm, but through repairing it skillfully when you do. Not through avoiding all conflict, but through having the tools to work through conflict toward genuine resolution. That's the work. That's what the next 7 days of practice begins. Not a one-time project, but an ongoing cultivation of character that continues throughout your life. The Junzi isn't someone who has arrived. The Junzi is someone who remains committed to the journey, who approaches each relationship with care, who treats each error as an opportunity to refine their understanding and practice. You don't need to be Confucius to do this. You don't need to be a sage or a philosopher. You just need to be willing to look honestly at your own behavior, to take responsibility without deflection, to care genuinely about your impact on others, and to follow through consistently on your commitments. That willingness is enough. The rest develops through practice. The work continues.